The wind howled across the broken land. As Jack pulled his jacket tighter around him, the ship had crashed. Just a day ago, but it felt like a lifetime. The sky above was dark, with heavy clouds, and the air smelled like burnt metal he had landed on. A strange moon, unknown and unmarked, and now he was alone, or so he thought. He moved carefully between the sharp rocks and broken walls of what looked like a forgotten building, old and covered in sand. The silence around him was thick like a blanket, and every small sound made his heart jump. He carried a small light in one hand, and a sharp metal rod in the other, just in case something moved. That night the wind became colder, and the sounds stranger. Jack set up a small fire, and sat close to it. Staring at the flames, he missed Earth, he missed people, even their noise, even the ones he used to hate. He closed his eyes, but a soft sound made them snap open, a whisper, not from the wind, not from his own mind, something real. He turned and saw her. She stood behind a broken wall, her skin pale like moonlight, her hair silver and long, and her eyes glowing blue. So bright in the dark it made him freeze in place. She was not human, that much was clear, but she was not a beast either. She looked young. Maybe his age, maybe older, but her face held no anger, no fear, just a deep, quiet stare. Jack raised his hands, slowly, showing he meant no harm, but she did not run. She stepped out into the light, her feet bare, her clothes thin and worn, as if she had been hiding here for a long time. Her glowing eyes locked on his every move, and then she spoke, not in words, but in a soft hum that echoed in his chest. He pointed to himself and said, "Jack." She tilted her head and repeated it. Jack. Her voice was soft, unsure, but it held something that made his heart beat faster. He pointed to her and waited. She hesitated, then placed a hand on her chest and said, "Valerie." Valerie watched him as he moved around the small fire. Her eyes never left him, and every time a loud sound came, her eyes glowed brighter. He asked questions, but she only gave short answers or strange looks. He learned she had been here since the fall of her people. She was alone, hiding from machines that hunted the living, machines called Watchers. That night, Jack woke to a strange feeling, like someone watching. He opened his eyes and saw Valerie sitting close, her eyes glowing, not blue now, but soft violet. He blinked, thinking maybe it was the firelight, but no, the color stayed calm, warm, not the sharp blue he saw before. He whispered her name. She looked at him and touched her eyes as if confused, then shook her head. She stood and stepped back into the shadows, her eyes turning blue again. Jack stayed awake for the rest of the night, wondering what just happened. The next day, he followed her across the land. She showed him where the machines sometimes walked. Long legs, no faces, cold and deadly. She warned him with a look, and they hid behind rocks, watching the giant pass close, its light scanning the ground. But when it neared Jack, it stopped. The light passed over him and paused, then moved on as if he did not matter. Valerie seemed shaken. She touched his arm and stared into his face, her eyes blue again, then slowly shifting violet again. Just for a moment, she said something in her own tongue, her voice low and filled with wonder. Jack did not understand, but he felt her hand tremble. Later that day, as the two sat under a broken arch, she drew shapes in the dust. Circles, lines, stars, and eyes, always eyes, and she pointed to one shape, the violet eye, and then to Jack. Her eyes flickered, and her voice dropped low. She said, "Danger blue, safe violet," and touched her own heart. Jack sat in silence, watching her. He could not explain it, but when she looked at him with those violet eyes, it felt like something new, something strange and strong, not fear, not warning, something else, something realized. The twin moons rose above them, and the cold night wind blew. Again, Jack wrapped his jacket tighter. Valerie sat closer back to the wall, her eyes now closed, no glow. He stared at her, and knew deep inside, this moon, this girl, these eyes, none of it was normal, and whatever came next would not be safe. But he also knew something else, something that made him stay near her, even though fear gripped his chest. Her eyes were not just lights, they were signals, and near him they changed, and he wanted to know why. The next morning, the sky was gray, and the wind brought dust across the empty ground. Jack stood near the edge of a cracked cliff, his boots leaving soft prints in the sand. He looked down and saw strange lines in the ground, like trails burned by machines long ago. They glowed faintly under the dirt. Valerie came beside him, her eyes blue again, scanning the horizon with care. She held up her hand to stop him from moving forward, her face tense, her eyes brighter now. She pointed to the land beyond the cliff, and drew a wide circle in the dirt with her finger, then placed a rock in the center. She tapped the rock and whispered, "Watchers." Jack knelt beside her, trying to understand. He looked out at the dry land and saw nothing at first, but then a shape moved in the fog. Something tall with thin legs and a glowing core in the chest. It moved slowly, turning its head side to side, like it was searching. Jack ducked behind a rock and held his breath. Valerie pressed close, her body tense, her breath shallow, her eyes glowing, strong blue. The thing moved on its legs, with Smooth steps, its body floating slightly above the ground. It scanned the area with lines of red light, but did not see them. Jack could feel the hum of its core like a deep drum in his bones. When it passed and was gone, he let out the breath he had been holding. Valari did not move. Not yet. She waited until the sound faded, then grabbed his arm and pulled him back toward the broken ruins they had used for shelter. They moved fast through the rocks and climbed down into a hole hidden by stones. Inside it was dark and quiet. Jack looked around and saw old walls marked with symbols and lights that no longer worked. Valari pointed at a cracked wall and pressed her palm against it. Nothing happened. She tried again, and this time a soft light blinkered once, then died. She looked sad and tired. Jack stepped forward and touched the wall beside her. The light blinked again and stayed on her eyes, turned from blue to violet in a slow shimmer, and she stepped back in shock. The wall opened with a low groan, revealing stairs that led down into the earth. Valari looked at him with wide eyes, her hands shaking. She spoke in her language quickly and pointed at him, then at the light, then at the stairs. Jack nodded and went first, holding his light. Ahead of him, the stairs were long and narrow, the air cold and still at the bottom. They found a large room filled with strange machines. Most broken, but one in the center still hummed with power. Jack stepped near it and saw symbols on a screen glowing faintly. Valari touched it, and a sound filled the room like a song made of metal and wind. Her eyes were blue again, but changed to violet as she kept her hand on the screen. Small image appeared above the machine, a floating shape like a star map. Lines connected glowing dots, and one of the dots pulsed red. Valari pointed at it and said, "Watcher," then pointed at another dot that pulsed green and said, "Safe." She moved her finger from the red to the green and looked at Jack with a question in her eyes. He nodded, and she smiled for the first time, her eyes warm, her face soft, but the moment was short. The map blinked, and a loud sound echoed from above the votes. Watcher was near again. The machine shut down, and the lights went dark. Valari grabbed his hand and pulled him into a narrow tunnel. At the back of the room, they crawled through the dark, the tunnel tight and rough. Jack scraped his arm on the wall, but kept moving. The sound of metal feet above them made his heart race. They reached the end of the tunnel and came out near the edge of a dried lake. Valari looked up and froze, her eyes bright blue again. One of the watchers stood across the lake, its head turning slowly, scanning the empty space. It had not seen them yet. Jack stepped forward without thinking. The machine turned its light toward him, scanned him head to toe, then turned away and moved on. Valari stood still, her eyes now flickering from blue to violet, over and over again. She walked up to him, slowly, and placed her hand on his chest right over his heart, then looked into his eyes, and said something soft, a word he did not know, but felt in his bones. She was scared, but she was also curious. The machines did not attack him. They saw him, but did not react back. At their shelter, Valari drew more shapes in the dirt, circles and eyes, and now she added a new mark, something that looked like a human. Jack pointed at it. She nodded, her eyes glowing violet, then fading as she looked at the sky. The watchers were still out there, but something about Jack was different, and now she needed to know what he really was. The sky above was darker now, as if something heavy was pressing down on the moon. Jack sat near a broken metal wall, with wires poking out of the side. His fingers moved slowly across an old alien device, shaped like a cube. It had blinking parts and strange buttons covered in dust. Valari stood a few feet away, her eyes glowing blue, watching the hills for any sign of movement. Jack had found the cube buried under rubble, near the place where the watcher had scanned him. Without reacting, something about the device had called to him, as if it had waited for his touch. Now he was trying to fix it, using bits from his ship and tools he had kept in a bag since the crash. Valari had warned him. In her soft voice and her broken words, she said, "Old things bring new danger." But Jack had to know what the device did. He felt it deep in his chest, like a string pulling him toward a truth he could not name. His hands worked with care. As sparks flew from the wires, the device lit up for a second, then faded again. He looked at Valari, and she gave a small nod, her eyes shifting from blue to violet, and back again. Jack smiled and tried again, this time pressing two metal plates together. A deep hum came from the cube, and a light rose from its center, forming a circle of symbols floating in the air. Valari stepped back, her eyes wide, glowing bright blue. The hum grew louder, until it became a sharp tone that shot upward into the sky like a beam of sound and light. Jack covered his ears as the wind roared around them. The clouds above spun in a slow circle, like something was waking far above or far below. The ground under their feet shook slightly, and then it stopped. Silence returned like a blanket dropped over the land. The light faded, the hum stopped, the sky went still, but the air had changed. Valari looked up and whispered, "Danger," her eyes glowing blue, so bright they lit her whole face. Jack stood beside her, unsure what he had just done, unsure if help would come, or if he had just called something worse. They packed quickly and left the area, walking through narrow paths and under broken arches. Valari moved with speed, her steps sure, her body tense. Jack followed close, watching the shadows stretch long behind them. She led him to a deep trench hidden by rocks and vines. They climbed down into it and found a chamber with smooth walls and old lights still flickering inside. The chamber were carvings covering every wall they showed. Strange creatures, some looked like Valari, tall and glowing, others looked human. Jack stared at one image, where a man with short hair stood between two armies, holding out his hands like he was stopping a war. Valari touched that carving, and her eyes changed again. Not blue, not violet, but something in between. She pressed her hand against the wall, and a door opened behind her, revealing a second chamber, filled with more machines, some broken, some still glowing with weak light. In the center stood a table with a circle of light floating above it. Jack stepped forward and placed his hand on the edge. The table responded with a soft hum, and more symbols rose into the air. Valar stared at him and said one word, over and over, blood, her voice shaking, her eyes glowing violet. Her hand reached for his but stopped in the air, as if unsure. Jack nodded and stepped closer. She took his hand and placed it on the center of the circle. It turned red, then purple, then gold. The chamber filled with light, and a sound like wind, and voices whispering. At once Valari fell to her knees. As visions filled her mind, she saw the past cities, made of light, people standing in peace, and then the war that followed, machines rising, skies burning, and the watchers walking over ashes. Her people ran, her people hid, and then her people vanished. She saw one human standing at the end, standing in front of a giant machine, arms wide, eyes full of tears. He shouted words she could not understand, and the machine stopped and walked away. Behind him stood a girl with silver hair, her eyes glowing violet, not blue. Valari opened her eyes and looked at Jack, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. She whispered, "Protect her," her voice barely there. Jack helped her stand, his own heart racing. He had not seen the visions, but he saw her face and knew something deep had changed. She now looked at him, not with fear, but with hope. Outside the chamber, the air had turned colder, the wind louder. Something had changed in the world. The light from the sky now flickered, like a broken signal, and far away the sound of machines echoed softly like drums in the deep earth. The signal had gone out, and something had heard. It's Valari held Jack's hand, her eyes glowing steady violet, now no longer flickering, no longer unsure. She looked up at the sky, then at the carving on the wall of the man who stood between war and peace. She touched it, and then touched Jack's face and whispered again, "Protect her." And this time Jack believed her. Whatever was coming, he was not just a lost human on a broken moon. He was part of something older, something powerful, and maybe, just maybe, something that could still be saved. Dust filled the air. As Jack and Valari moved deeper into the lower ruins, the wind could no longer reach them. Here only silence and soft echoes followed their steps. The path was lit by flickering lights, and the walls like stars trapped in glass. Some were cracked, some dead, but others still glowed with a soft blue. Jack stopped as they entered a new chamber. It was round and large, the walls carved with symbols and faces, both human and alien. At the center stood a tall stone glowing with faint purple light. It pulsed like a slow heartbeat. The stone was smooth and black, but sparks of memory danced inside it like clouds of fireflies. Valari stepped toward it, her hands trembling. She turned to Jack and spoke, her voice soft and slow. She said, "The stone holds past, not words, not books, only feeling, only memory." Jack nodded and stepped back, letting her go. First she placed both hands on the stone and closed her eyes. The light inside the stone brightened and wrapped around her fingers like warm smoke. Of Valari's breath caught as the memory pulled her in. Her eyes turned violet, her body stiffed, her mouth moved, but no sound came. Jack watched as a faint image rose from the stone, like a dream made of light. It showed a city of towers glowing in the sky, rivers of silver flowing between them. People walked across bridges, their clothes shining like silver. Fire fell from the sky, and the ground shook. Machines burst from below, metal and fire and death. The people ran the city, screamed, and a great shadow walked between the towers. It had no face, only red eyes, and long arms made of blades. The watchers had come. Another image followed, one that made Jack lean forward. A human man stood at the gate of the city. He was tall and strong, his skin marked with signs, and his eyes filled with sadness. He raised a glowing rod into the sky, and the machines paused. They listened to him, not because he was loud, but because he was true. Valari opened her eyes, gasping for breath, her hand still on the stone. She looked at Jack, her voice shaking. She said, "The human tried to stop war. He gave his voice to the stone. The stone remembers the city lived because of him." Then she stepped back and pointed to Jack, her eyes now glowing with a strange new color, a deep violet with gold at the edge. Jack stepped forward, slowly drawn to the stone without fear. It did not burn it, did not bite when he touched it. The light inside shifted again, and more images rose. This time they moved faster, showing war, then peace. Then silence, then one face again and again. Not his, but close. Valari said softly. Not you, but like you, same blood, same light, same soul. Jack felt something rise inside him, not memory, but a question. A pull, something old in his bones, calling him forward. The stone glowed brighter when he touched it, both hands now resting on the warm surface. His heart beating hard, the images faded, and the stone dimmed, as if resting again. Jack let go, and stepped back, his breath deep and slow. Valari stood close, her eyes, watching him not with fear now, but with something deeper, maybe belief, maybe trust. Maybe something even older. She said softly, you are not just man, you are link. Your voice can open your hand, can lead your light, can call. Jack did not answer, his mind spinning, his chest heavy. He looked again at the carvings on the walls, so many faces looking back at him, some smiling, some crying, all watching. Then Valari walked to the far side of the room, and pressed a small stone in the wall. A new door opened with a soft hiss behind. It was a short hall filled with dust and air that smelled like time itself. At the end of the hall was another room, smaller, darker. Inside it rested a chair and another stone. This one black with no light. Valari said, this one memory of pain, not peace, not safe. Jack walked inside and stood before the chair. The air was cold, the light weak. He did not sit, he only watched the stone and asked, why keep pain, why not destroy it? Valari replied in her quiet voice, memory of pain is warning, is lesson, is truth. Jack nodded slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of the chair. He turned and looked at Valari, who now stood in the light, her face calm, her eyes soft. He said, we keep going, we find more, we learn more. She nodded, and for the first time touched his hand. Without fear they left the room and walked back. Through the halls, past glowing lights and silent walls, the air behind them still. The air ahead growing colder. They did not speak much, but they both knew something had changed. The stone had spoken, the past had opened, and Jack was no longer a stranger. On this moon he was something more, something remembered, something called, and whatever waited ahead, it would not wait much longer. The ground opened under their feet, not with a quake, but with a slow breath, like the world itself had exhaled. Jack and Valari stood at the edge of a wide tunnel hidden under the sand. It was not marked by signs or stones, only a faint blue light that glowed along the cracks in the earth. Valari stepped forward, her eyes glowing violet, not from fear but from something older. They climbed down using handholds carved into the rock. The tunnel spiraled downward for what felt like hours. The air, cool and dry, lights on the walls flickered to life as they passed, some lit with blue, some with green. Jack touched one, and it warmed under his fingers, as if welcoming him back. He looked at Valari, and she nodded, without a word. At the bottom they stepped into a vast open space, wide as a stadium, with towers of metal rising from the floor. The underground city was real, and alive. Lights moved across the walls like rivers. Energy flowed between buildings in bright arcs. The floor was covered in tiles shaped like stars and eyes and keys. Jack walked forward slowly, his boots tapping soft. Valari walked beside him, her hand brushing across the walls as if greeting old friends, her voice barely a whisper. She said, this place, last safe city before the fall, last breath of peace before machines came. Jack looked up at the roof above, shaped like a dome, covered in crystal. It showed the sky above, though they were deep underground. It was not a screen, it was real. They walked past tall statues of her people and of humans, standing side by side, weapons at their feet, hands joined in peace. Jack stopped before one statue that looked almost like him. The face was older, the eyes tired, but kind. In the stone hand was a small rod like the one in the memory stone. Valari touched it and said, protected deeper. In the city they found a garden filled with tall glowing trees and blue vines that moved softly in the wind. Though no wind touched them, flowers opened when Jack passed, glowing gently. Valari smiled and said, these only bloom near Bond. Her eyes glowing deeper now, like soft fire. They reached the center of the city, where a round platform floated above the ground, rings of light circling it slowly. At the heart stood a tower, with a door shaped like an eye. Valari reached out to touch it, but it did not open. She stepped back. Jack stepped forward, and the door opened with a low hum. Her eyes widened, her mouth open in wonder. Inside was a room filled with floating lights and maps, spinning slowly in the air. Symbols danced across the walls, and one word appeared again and again in both their languages. Hope. Jack reached out and touched a panel. A soft voice spoke, not with words, but with thought flowing into his mind, like a warm river. Welcome return, confirmed command. Sherrod. Valari looked at him with tears in her eyes. She whispered, you are key, not just blood, not just face, you are part of system, part of Bond. She placed a hand on another panel, and the maps shifted. showing the surface above red dots moving fast. Toward their location, the watchers were coming, not one, not two, but many. They had followed the signal. The city was not hidden anymore. Jack stood still, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The system asked, choose, defend or unlock path. Both cannot be done. Energy is limited. Valari looked at him, her face full of fear and hope, her hand reaching for his. He turned to the map again and touched the spinning sphere at the center. It opened into layers, showing a weapon deep under the city, not a bomb, not a blade, but a pulse, a wave that could stop the machines for a time, but not forever. To use it would drain the city's last power. The gardens would die, the sky dome would fade. Said softly, this place, last dream, last song of my people. If it sleeps, we lose history. If it dies, we lose peace. Jack looked at her and said, what if we try both? What if we wake the Guardian? She looked at him with wide eyes and said, legend, only. The story not real. He smiled and said, maybe story waits for right voice. They moved to another chamber deep below, where carvings on the walls showed a great being made of light and stone. Resting in sleep, hands folded, wings of crystal across its back. Words glowed faintly beneath it. Guardian waits for bond of two species to wake, one by heart, one by blood. Jack and Valari stood together, their hands touching the symbols. At once the ground shook softly, and the carvings lit up one by one. A soft hum filled the air, not loud, but strong. The air around them grew warm, and the light above glowed brighter. Something was waking. Valari's eyes turned pure violet, her voice steady now, not whisper, but song. Jack's hand burned with light, a pattern glowing across his skin. The city began to change. Machines stirred, but not to fight, to listen. The Guardian was real, and it was beginning to rise. They had found the last hope of the old world, and it had heard them. The walls trembled with every breath of the awakening force. The lights in the underground city pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, steady, louder. With each moment, Jack and Valari stood before the great sealed chamber, where the Guardian rested. Stone doors, marked with symbols, now glowed with fire. Blue light lines of energy ran through the floor. Toward the center, Valari's eyes glowed a pure and deep violet. Her voice no longer soft, no longer shaking. She stepped forward and placed both hands on the door. Her touch lit the carvings, and the door began to open with a long, low sound. The inside was dark at first, but then light rose from the ground in waves, revealing the figure. Sleeping within it was larger than anything Jack had seen. Not a machine, not a living thing, but both. Its body shaped like armor but filled with veins of light, its face smooth like glass, its chest marked with two glowing circles, one blue, one gold. It lay still, its arms crossed over a sphere floating above its chest. Valari whispered the name of the Guardian, not in her words, but in an ancient tone, a name that made the air vibrate. The Guardian's chest lights flashed once, then again, then slowly began to glow steady. Jack stepped forward as the light responded, his hand lifted without his will. Drawn by the pull of the sphere, he touched the sphere, and the Guardian opened its eyes. They were silver and wide, and full of memory, not anger, not fear, only deep time. Jack's hand glowed, and the same patterns from before lit up on his skin. Stepped beside him, and spoke again, her voice a chord of sound rising through the chamber. The Guardian spoke not in sound, but in thought, words flowing into their minds like wind through trees. It said, threat confirmed, watchers coming, survival limited. Choose, protect city, or reveal truth. One path only, one power remains. Valari turned to Jack, her eyes flickering blue, then violet, then back again. She said, if we protect city, it lives. If we reveal truth, world may change. Watchers may stop, not by force, but by memory. Jack said, what truth? Valari looked at the Guardian and said, old truth, forgotten truth. What watchers were, what we were, what humans once were, before all fell apart. The Guardian raised its arms, and light filled the room, showing images, not just on walls, but in the air around them, showing humans and her kind, working side by side, building great cities, building peace, building unity. Then one human turned, broke the code, changed the bond watchers created to punish, not protect. Saw faces like his filled with light, then filled with fire. He saw a choice made long ago, to hide the truth, to bury the memory, to save the city, but let the world forget, and now the same choice was his. Valari placed her hand on his again, and said, softly, I trust you, I will follow your path. Alarms rang through the city, red light flashed above the dome. The watchers were near, moving through the outer walls, fast and without sound. The Guardian's light dimmed as it waited for command. Its chest lights flickering once more, the choice pressed heavy like stone on Jack's shoulders. He looked at the images once more, and then at Valari, stepped forward and spoke with his hand, not his voice. He pressed it to the golden circle, and the Guardian responded, rising slowly from the ground, with wings of crystal unfolding from its back, light flowing from its hands. Like rivers, it turned toward the city and began to walk its steps. Silent, but full of power, Valerie ran beside it, her eyes glowing. Brighter than ever, her voice lifted again, singing not for battle but for memory. The walls answered her, the lights answered her, the machines paused watchers at the edge of the city. Stopped just for a breath, long enough for Jack to do what must be done. He'd climbed the high tower at the center of the city, where the core of power waited, where the pulse could be sent. He reached it, and placed both hands on the control stone. It lit up and spoke in his mind, confirming identity, confirming link, asking final command. Jack closed his eyes, and thought one word revealed. The stone cracked open, and a beam of golden light shot into the sky, past the dome, into the clouds, above, reaching far into space. Not just sound, not just signal, but memory, uncut, raw, unhidden. It moved like fire across the network of watchers, across the machines, across the buried minds that once served and now ruled. The watchers stopped in place, their red eyes turned gold, their blades folding back, their bodies lowering to the ground, not in defeat, but in understanding. They remembered what they once were, what they once served, and they waited below. The Guardian stood still, wings folded, eyes closed. Valerie stood beside it, her hand on its arm, her breath slow, her voice silent but strong. Jack came down the tower and walked to her. She turned to him and smiled, eyes glowing violet with soft light. Not danger, not fear, not question, only answer. They had chosen the truth, and the truth had answered back. The city stood in silence, not broken, not ruined, but still, as if holding its breath. The sky dome above no longer flickered, now it shone with soft gold light. The watchers who once marched with fire and blades now stood quiet, their lights dimmed, their arms lowered, their shapes like statues carved from the past. Jack stood among them, not as a prisoner, not as prey, but as something new, something remembered. Valerie walked beside him, her steps slow, her eyes glowing, a deep violet touched with gold. She said softly, the memory moved through them. It was not just data, it was soul. Her people had always believed machines had no soul, but what if soul was not just breath, not just blood? What if it was memory and choice? The Guardian knelt at the heart of the city, its wings folded across its chest, its voice silent, but its presence strong. It had not fought. It had not burned, it had only remembered, and shown the watchers what had been hidden, what had been lost. Now they stood waiting, not for orders, but for purpose. Jack climbed the steps to the top of the central tower, where the stone of command still glowed, the same symbols now changed. They spoke not of war, not of shields, not of fear, but of unity, of healing, of restart. Valerie joined him there, her hand reaching for his. Without words she said, once we thought humans broke the bond, once we thought your kind betrayed us. Now I see the truth was held by few, not all. Many tried to stop the war, many gave their light for peace. Jack nodded, his voice quiet, his eyes on the watchers below. He said, if peace is possible, we must not waste this chance. Together they placed their hands on the final stone. Shaped like a flame, it pulsed with color: blue for danger, red for war, green for growth. But when their hands touched it together, it turned violet, a flame that flickered and grew until it rose above the tower for all to see. The watchers turned to look, and then knelt, their heads lowered, their weapons melted into light. The Guardian stood and raised one arm, and from its hand flowed a wave of light across the city, across the ruins, across the world. The machines that once hunted now moved to rebuild broken walls. Lifted fallen trees, stood towers of glass, and stone rose from dust. Valerie wept as the city bloomed again. Gardens opened, flowers sang, wind moved with joy, not fear. Jack watched the machines working together, not as slaves, not as lords, but as keepers of a new dawn. He saw humans in old recordings now playing on walls, smiling beside aliens working, planting, laughing. The old world had known peace for a time now. That memory returned like spring after endless winter. Valerie turned to Jack and said, my people may come back now. Not all are gone, some still wait in hidden stars. They wait for a sign of hope now. They will see the violet flame, now they will come. Jack said, Earth must know too. They must see what happened. They must learn what we forgot. He touched the beacon stone and sent a signal toward the stars. It carried no warning, no cry for help, only truth, memory, hope. It carried Valerie's voice, singing the song of her people, and Jack's promise spoken in simple words. We remember, we change, we walk together. The stars listened, the worlds waited, and far away lights began to move again. Later, Jack and Valerie sat near the garden, where violet trees now grew, the air soft, the light warm. Her hand rested in his, her eyes no longer shifting, no longer uncertain, always violet, always calm. He said, do you still feel danger near me? She smiled and said, only if you ever leave. They laughed, not from relief, but from joy, true joy, rare and real. The watchers walked nearby, carrying seeds, carrying stones, not weapons. They worked in silence, But not emptiness. Their lights glowed with soft color: green, gold, blue, none, red, none, angry. The Guardian remained near the heart of the city, its body now resting, but its eyes always open, watching, not with suspicion, but with care. It had known silence for so long now. It heard voices again. Now it heard peace again. Jack looked at the stars above and thought of home. He knew Earth might not understand at first, but he had seen what truth could do, seen what memory could unlock if trusted. He said, "One day maybe Earth and Valeris' world will meet, not with war, not with fear, but like us together." Valeri leaned close and whispered, "Then we will light the flame again, and this time it will never fade." And so the city once buried became a light. In the dark, not of power, not of rule, but of healing. A city where danger once ruled, now guarded by peace. A city where a girl with glowing eyes found safety beside a human, and where her eyes changed not because of fear, but because of love, because of trust, because of hope, and the violet flame burned on.